Today's daf is Nun Hey, and we are on the bottom of Nun Daled, the second to the last line. So it says Natalet Adam Mimishe Mimarespo. So we finished the bringing of the ketoret, so the bringing of the incense into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Kohen Gadol comes out, and the next thing he has to do is to do the applications of blood of the par, of the bull. And it describes these applications and how when he applies the blood, or when he throws the blood, whatever you want to call it, there's no good word in English, spritzes the blood, I don't know what the word is. The applications of blood are done. They're done, it says, 1 time above and 7 times below. Achat lemala v'sheva lemata. And it says that we count achat v'achat, achat v'shtayim. It gives us the whole description. And it says he doesn't have intention to throw it lemala or lemata ela kimatzlif. What does kimatzlif mean? So the Gemara asks, "My kimatzlif." What does it mean kimatzlif? This word kimatzlif that he doesn't intend. Now we know that the way that the Gemara understands, the way the Mishnah understands, is that the blood was not thrown actually on the kaporet or on the aron. It was thrown in front of it on the ground.
And it wasn't really thrown. It wasn't
really thrown. It was dripped.
Yeah, right.
It was more like it dripped, okay, than thrown. So kimatzlif. What is kimatzlif? Mahaveh Rav Yehuda demonstrated it. Keminagda. He says it's like keminagdana. It's like somebody, as Rashi says, kemakeber tzuah shematchil min haktafayim umakev olech lemata. It's like a person who's whipping another person, that he starts on the shoulders and he goes lower and lower. What does that mean? The way that he would do it was that he would hold his hand upwards, as we're going to see, for what's called lemala. Lemala means he holds his hand with the back of his hand down and the palm of his hand up, and he would drip it on the ground. And then he turns his hand downwards, meaning palm facing down, and he does lemata. Drips 1 time, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, with his hand facing downwards, but each time lowering his hand. So if you were to look at the ground, you would see a line, in other words, of drops, each one lower than the next.
That's not like
or each one lower than the previous.
That's not like whipping.
Well, they're comparing it to whipping, meaning that when they would whip somebody, I guess. I don't have much experience. I don't have much experience with whipping, but apparently, what they're saying is, what Rashi is saying is that when they would whip somebody, it would start above and then they would go down lower and lower on that person's back. The order. Yeah, not the gesture. Apparently. Right. So So now Tana, it says in the Braita, keshehu mazeh ino mazeh ala kaporet ela keneged ovia shel kaporet. When he applies the blood or throws the blood, he doesn't do it on the kaporet. The kaporet is the cover of the aron. Rather, keneged ovia shel kaporet. He does it even with the thickness of the kaporet. In other words, his hand is held at the level of the kaporet. Rashi says, keneged ovia v'lo hayu damim nog'im ba. It doesn't. The blood would not touch the actual kaporet. He does it so that his hand is at the same point as the kaporet, the thickness of the kaporet. In other words, that's where he holds his hand in the air.
What do you mean the thickness of the kaporet?
The kaporet meaning at the even with its side. In other words, if you're looking at the side of a book, this is the thickness of the book.
Yeah.
So it means he held his hand like this.
But wasn't he facing the...
It was facing it. The kaporet is here.
Yeah.
So his hand is like parallel with the kaporet.
Oh, okay.
That's what it means.
Okay.
Not over it. That wouldn't be the thickness of it. The thickness is of like the side. In other words, he's standing beside it, or in front of it, really, and his hand is here. And he's putting his finger down like this. Now, when he drips or applies the blood above, he does it with his hand facing down, meaning the back of his hand is facing down. And when he drops the blood that we say is lemata, he faces his hand so that the palm is downwards, okay? Now Rashi explains, when he's supposed to be putting the blood up, it means that the back of his hand is below, and he flicks it, or whatever he does, upwards. So in other words, he does this in front of himself. He moves his hand. He does move his hand to make the blood go. But it's sort of like if you had a drop of something on your finger and you did this, you move your hand up a little bit, the drop will go up but then go downwards. That's the idea of what he did. So, where do we get this from?
How can can that be when the specific text said not up, not down, just like a matzlif, whatever that means?
What do you mean?
How can it say, upward and downwards when the text specifically says
Lo lemala velo lemata? No, he does achat lemala v'sheva lemata. What does it mean that he did achat lemala v'sheva lemata? It doesn't mean that he put one on top of the aron and then the rest of them were below the aron. Mm-hmm. It means that they were all on the ground in a line, like the way that you whip. That's how they're interpreting the Mishnah. It's an interesting interpretation. I'm not saying it's so smooth, but that's how they're interpreting it. So Rav Acha says, where did they get this idea that we don't actually throw the blood on the kaparet? Because if you read the Torah, it sounds like it says you put it on the kaparet. So where did they get this idea? So Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Zera. Rav Acha bar Yaakov said that Rabbi Zera said, Amar Kra, because the pasuk says v'izau to ala kaparet v'lifnei kaparet. It says you should throw the blood on the kaparet and in front of the kaparet. Okay. Now, in order to understand the ensuing discussion, we need to know something, that there are two Pesukim, one that describes the application of the blood of the par, the bull, which was first, and one that describes the application of the blood of the sa'ir, the goat, which was second. Now, when it talks about the sa'ir, it mentions al ha-kaporet ve'lifnei ha-kaporet. You have to throw the blood on the kaparet, which means upwards. That's the implication is al, lemala, up. And lifnei kaparet, in front of, which implies below. When it talks about the par, it says, v'lifnei kaparet, it says, v'hiza be'etzba'o al penei kaparet kedma. He has to throw with his finger on the face of the kaparet to the east. V'lifnei kaparet yazeh sheva pa'amim min adam be'etzba'o. And in front of the kaparet, he throws blood 7 times with his finger. Okay? Now, what's the point here? So the way that the Chazal interpret these psukim is as follows. They say that when it talks about the sa'ir, it says, v'hiza oto ala kaparet, that he should throw it on the kaparet. They interpret the it, oto, as meaning singular. So they interpret that as achat lemala, one above. But then it says v'lifnei kaparet, and in front of the kaparet, which they interpret as the lemata, the downwards throwing of the blood. So they say that it only mentions how many you do upwards. It says oto lifnei kaparet. In other words, ala kaparet rather. It only says one up, but it doesn't say how many down. And when you come to the par, when you come to the bull, it says he should put blood on, but it doesn't say how much. And it says 7 in front of. So the problem is that when it comes to the sa'ir, it tells us how many to do upwards, but not how many to do downwards. And when it comes to the par, it tells you how many to do downwards, but not how many to do upwards.
Oh.
So each one is missing something. Okay, each one is missing something. So that's the important thing to keep in mind. So now they say like this: this is speaking about the sa'ir. This is speaking about the goat, and it says oto ala kaporet, one on top. Lo yomar lemata b'sa'ir. It doesn't have to say lemata. It doesn't have to mention the downward throwing of the sa'ir. De lo tzarich. But we don't need it. De gamar mimata de par. Because we already know from the par. In other words, in the case of the bull, it tells you do 7 downwards. We know that already. So we don't need to mention the downwards motion when it comes to the sa'ir. So lama nemar, why does it do it? Why does it mention it with the sa'ir? Well, since it already told us we're going to do the same thing with the sa'ir and the par. So since the par it says 7, we know it's going to be 7 downwards. Why did it have to mention the downwards motion when it comes to the sa'ir? La kushe al lifnei. The reason is because the word al and the word lifnei. When it comes to the sa'ir, it says to put it al hakaporet, on the actual aron. When it comes to the par, it says lifnei. Okay, lifnei hakaporet. It doesn't say al hakaporet. It never says to do it on the ark. It only says to do it lifnei. Okay, so because that's the case, what does that mean? Ma lifnei de lav al, af al de lav al. What's the reason why it does that? In other words, why does it mention, in the case of the sa'ir, the placing of the blood lifnei kaparet, in front of the kaparet? To tell you that even when it says al, it doesn't really mean al. Even when it says on, it means lifnei. In other words, it's emphasizing that it's metaphoric, that it doesn't mean to literally put the blood on the ark. It means to put the blood in an upward motion in front of it, as opposed to a downward motion in front of it. Okay, that's how they interpret it. So, ma lifnei de lav al. So it says adraba. Say the opposite. Lo yomar lemala bapar. We don't need to be told about the upward motion when it comes to the bowl, because you already told us the upward motion, that there has to be one lemala with the sa'ir. De lo tarich. De gamar mimala de sa'ir. We'll learn it from the sa'ir. We don't need to learn it from the. We don't need to have a special pasuk with the par. So lama nemar. Why is it stated la'akushe lifnei la'al? Maybe it's the opposite, to tell you that in front of is the same as al. Ma al mamash af lifnei al mamash. In other words, we can reverse it. You're assuming that the reason why we have an extra, what seems to be an extra phrase in the case of the sa'ir, is to teach you that even when it says to put it on the ark, it's only metaphoric and it really means in front of. But I'll say the opposite. I'll say that when it says in front of with the par, it also has an extra verse. Because it also says in the par to put it upwards. And we don't need to be told that with the par, because it doesn't tell us anyway the number. We have to learn it from the sa'ir anyway. So why even mention it by the par? So the fact that it's mentioning it is something extra. Maybe this something extra is to tell you that just like al is literal, just like al literally means to put it on the ark, lifnei also means on the side of the ark or something like that. Right? In other words, on the front of it. Right? So you could interpret it literally. Why do we do it that way? Hai mai. What are you talking about? We can understand the first way. The first way makes sense. That the reason why with the goat, it tells us that you have to put blood downwards, even though it doesn't tell the number, so we need to consult with the par anyway. Why does it have to tell us that? Why does it have to mention it? Miba'ele, we can still understand why. Because, in other words, we can say that the reason why it mentions lifnei hakaporet in the sa'ir is to tell you that all of the discussion of placing things on the ark is just metaphorical. Okay, it's not literal. And then, what would we say? So we'll say, Bishlama lemata de sa'ir lakushe lemala depar. Mi ba'ele lekidetana deve Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. We still have use for the other pasuk. The pasuk of the par. How so? Because detana deve Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov al panei akaporet kedma zebana av lekol makom shenemar panei eno elakadim. That we already have, in other words, we have a way to account for the extra pasuk with reference to the sa'ir. The extra pasuk with reference to the sa'ir is the mention of the downwards. And we're saying that downwards is to tell you that just like downwards doesn't mean on, so too when it says on, it doesn't really mean on. It just means in an upward motion. And then when it says in the par that al penea kaporet kedma, that you should put blood on the kaporet to the east, and it doesn't tell you the number, so it's a useless statement, so to speak. It's an extraneous statement because it doesn't tell us how much. So we don't know that it's only one, so we don't really need it anyway. What is it coming to tell you? What Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov told you, which is al penea kaporet, on the face of the kaporet, means kedma, east. Ze bana'av kol makom shnemar penei eno elakadim, which means whenever something in the Beit HaMikdash is referred to as the face, it means the east. In other words, we have a purpose for that extra phrase with the par. So we have a purpose for the extra phrase with the sa'ir, and we have a purpose for the extra phrase with the par. But you, my friend, are telling me that extra phrase of the par is not to teach you a concept that the east is called penei, that the east is called the face of something, but it's for something else. Which namely, but if you're going to tell me that no, that extra phrase of the par, al panei kaporet kedma, is to tell you, that is to connect back to the sa'ir, and to tell you that just like it says in the sa'ir, al hakaporet, and it's literal, so too when it says in front of, it means on the kaporet, it means on the ark. That's what you want to tell me. But then we're going to have a problem, because according to that, then if you're going to tell me lemala de parlakushe lemata de sa'ir lemayata, so then what is the purpose of mentioning lemata in the sa'ir? What is the purpose of the downward motion in the sa'ir? In other words, you're going to have no use for that extra pasuk. The assumption of the Gemara here is that if you don't give me complete information, you're not giving me any information. So you give me complete information about the upwards motion, the upwards throwing for the sa'ir. You tell me it's only going to be one time, but then you mention the downwards motion and you don't tell me how many times. With the par, you tell me the upwards motion, but you don't give me a number of times. You tell me the downwards motion and tell me the number of times. So I only have complete information about downwards for par and upwards for sa'ir. What about the extra? Right. What about the extra phrase in each one? The extra unusable phrase. So if I interpret it, I have a way to interpret the extra phrase of the par that the extra phrase of the par is teaching me a general halacha about the Beit HaMikdash, and the extra phrase of the sa'ir is teaching me that when it says on the ark, it's not literal. However, if I'm going to say that no, the extra phrase of the par is actually teaching me that the application to the kaporet, the application of the blood to the ark, is literal, so then what do I do with the extra verse by the sa'ir? The extra verse by the sa'ir has no purpose. So therefore we have to go the other way. We have to say that it's all to teach you that it's metaphoric, that it's not literal. The reason why it emphasizes the word lifnei kaporet in the sa'ir is to tell you that this is all lifnei kaporet. That even when it says al, even when it says on, it doesn't literally mean on, but it means in front of, in an upward motion.
But where do you get the fact that it's metaphoric?
Because of the emphasis on lifnei kaporet, without telling me the number, it just says lifnei kaporet. That's what they're saying. They're saying that we're taking that just like it says lifnei here, and it says, and it's to come to tell you that al is like lifnei. That neither of them are really in front of, neither of them are really on the kaporet. They're both in front.
I mean, you encounter a lot of metaphoric statements.
Well, it's all to keep the curtains clean.
Right. Well, on doesn't have to necessarily mean that it's physically going on. It just means above and below.
So the text itself...
That's how they're reading it. That's how they're interpreting it. They're saying that the emphasis on lifnei kaporet is to tell you that just as that doesn't mean on it, so too, al doesn't mean on it. It means upwards, but in front of it. Okay, that's how they're interpreting it. Now, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, the pasuk says that you should throw the blood on the kaporet and in front of the kaporet, which is the pasuk of the sa'ir that we are using as an extra pasuk to teach us that al ha-kaporet is not literal. So the Gemara says, what do you learn from this? Lamadnu kama lemala b'sa'ir achat. We learn from this. It says oto ala kaporet. It on the kaporet, meaning there's only one lemala. Lemata b'sa'ir eni yodea kama. I don't know how many downwards for the sa'ir. Right? It doesn't say in the pasuk, as we saw, we already noticed. It says lifnei kaporet, but it doesn't say how many. So then, harei nidan, I'll figure this out. Nemru damim lemata b'par, nemru damim lemata b'sa'ir. It says downwards blood with regard to the bull and with regard to the goat. Ma lemata b'par sheva. Explicitly, it tells us with the bull that the downwards is 7. Af lemata b'sa'ir sheva. So too, when it comes to the goat, the downward is 7. In other words, if we're comparing downward to downward, lifnei kaporet to lifnei kaporet in the pasuk, 7 and 7, right? However, o kilach lederech zo, or maybe I can go the other way. Nemru damim lemala b'sa'ir v'nemru damim lemata b'sa'ir. I'll make it internally consistent. What do I know for sure about the goat? That there's one lemala, there's one above, there's one upwards application of blood. So maybe I could say like this: Ma lemala b'sa'ir achat af lemata b'sa'ir achat. I could say, just like I know for sure that the upwards spritzing of blood is 1.
How do you do an application of blood upwards?
You like imagine you have something on you're not smearing, you're doing this. It's on your finger and you do this, you throw it up with your finger. So if there's only one above, maybe there's also only one downwards, because we know that the one above is definitely correct. So maybe we shouldn't compare it to the part, we should compare it to itself. So now the question is, let's see which one is it more similar to. On one hand, you could argue that we should compare the downward application to downward application, just like downward in par, downward in the bowl, explicitly it says in the Torah is 7. So we should say about the sa'ir also it's 7, but adirabba we could say the opposite. Dan in gufo me gufo, then in gufo me alma. But on the other hand, we could say no, internal consistency is better. And what do we know about the goat for sure? That the upward is 1. So maybe the downward should be 1. So the Gemara says, Talmud Lamar, the Braita says, Talmud Lamar, the pasuk tells you, V'asad damo kasher asal edam hapar, that you should do with the blood of the sa'ir what you did with the blood of the bull. She'en Talmud Lamar kasher asa. It doesn't have to say the word kasher asa. In other words, it could have just said V'asad damo kidam hapar. You can make its blood like the blood of the par. Instead it says Ka'asher asa ledam hapar, like he did to the blood of the bull. In other words, it emphasizes the procedure is the same. Umat Talmud Lamar kasher asa. What does it mean? Like you did with the blood of the par. You call asyotav shavot. That all of their performance should be the same. Just like with the par at 7, With the bull, it's 7. With the goat, it's 7. In other words, from the fact that it emphasizes you should do with this blood like you did with the blood of the par, and you should put it in front of the kaparet, that means the same number of times. That's how the Braita is learning it. It makes sense. It's a very easy limud to understand. But now we go the other way. Lamadnu kama lemata bapar ubisa'ir. So Sheva. So we know now that downwards for both the par and the sa'ir, we're saying it requires 7. But lemala bapar eni yodea kama. But it doesn't say anywhere in the pasuk about the bull, the upwards of the bull. How many times upwards? Let me figure this out logically. So it's the same logic again, basically. It says upwards with regard to the goat, and we know that that's only one. And it says upwards with regard to the bull, and we don't know which one. We don't know what's what. So maybe we could argue, just like with the goat, it means one. With the par, it also means one. Or we could say, again, like we did before, internal consistency. Within par, what do we know for sure? That downwards is 7. So maybe we should say, so just like downwards in the bull, we know it's 7, because the Torah says 7, maybe upwards is also 7. So then the Gemara says, or the Braita says, Nira lemidome. Let's see which one it's more similar to. Danin malami malaven, danin malami mata. On one hand, we could argue we should compare upwards application to upwards application, and just like we know the goat is definitely one time, the par should also be one time. Adraba, no, danin gufo mi gufo. We should learn par from par, not par from sa'ir.
Right? The movement of the Kohen's hand, not the direction.
Right. The direction of the hand.
It's the direction of the blood, but why aren't we considering the direction of the blood?
It all ends up on the floor anyway.
Lemala could be this. Lemala, in other words, you go like this, and the blood goes up. That's lemala.
It does. That is correct. That is what it is. That is what it is.
And then it falls down on the ground.
Yeah. But it all ends up on the ground, but it goes up.
Rabbi,
you flick it up. You flick it upwards. Right.
Rabbi, we should be learning one from the other rather than internally, because it says, do it like you
right,
did.
well, that's
and
exactly
you're giving
right.
it to, and there's obviously a reason for that.
No, you're absolutely right. So that's exactly what it concludes. You could argue that you should learn it internally and not from something else. But Talmud Amar, you should do its blood like you did. Right? Shein Talmud Amar kasher asa. What's the extra phrase kasher asa like you did? Like he did. Umat Talmud Amar kasher asa shiu kol asiyotav shavot. Kishem shelamata b'par sheva, kach lamata b'sa'ir sheva. Kishem shelamala b'sa'ir achat, kach lamala b'par achat. In other words, from the fact that the pasuk equates them, you end up with 7 below and 1 above for all of them. Now you're exactly. I mean, you're right. But what the Braita is doing, it's showing you. In other words, these midrashei halacha, what they try to show you is how the pasukim were analyzed. And since there were certain ambiguities about the comparison between the par and sa'ir, because a person could say, well, it's saying that just like the par and sa'ir, just like the par has blood applied, so too the sa'ir does. It doesn't mean exactly the same way, maybe. And it's not exactly clear. In other words, whether we should choose the number 7 for par and the number 1 for sa'ir, or should we cross over and do? It's not exactly clear. So it's just showing you what the logic was, how they understood, how they had a conundrum. Do we learn it internally or do we learn it across? And then they used the pasuk kasher asal dam par. The emphasis is that it should be the exact same procedure. Whatever is established in par, we transfer over to sa'ir. Whatever is established in sa'ir, we transfer over to par.
Now, they started this discussion by asking what do you mean by kematzlif, and then they got into this.
Well, that was a very easy, that was done. Matzlif was over. Matzlif was finished, because matzlif was just that it's like a whip. In other words, that it goes in a line, that he lowers his hand each time.
And a whip means...
It doesn't mean a whipping, apparently, but it means that it means that there's the stripes on the back of the guy who's getting whipped, they go down his back.
You say he lowers his hand. That means...
In other words, if I'm doing this, the drop will be here. If I lower my hand a little more, the drop will be, and then I lower it more. So from each angle,
but there's
going to be a line. The drop is going to be in a line.
Lowering the hand makes a line.
Makes a line. Right, that's how it will work.
Well, you lower it in like I guess.
And an angle.
And an angle. That's what it seems like. I mean, I've never been there, but I've never been to the Kodesh. I'm just guessing.
It's not intuitive.
Yeah. Achat v'achat, achat u'shtayim. So you have achat v'achat, achat u'shtayim. So the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Achat v'achat, achat u'shtayim, achat v'shalosh, achat v'arba, achat v'chamesh, achat v'shesh, achat v'sheva. This should sound very familiar to Divrei Rabbi Meir. This is what Rabbi Meir says. However, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, because Rabbi Yehuda didn't like that, he said achat v'achat. Okay, I agree with you in the beginning. But then he had shtayim v'achat, shalosh v'achat, arba v'achat, chamesh v'achat, shesh v'achat, sheva v'achat. What? He's doing it backwards. What's going on here? Velo pliga, they really didn't argue. It says mor ki atre. One is going like his place. Umor ki atre. And one is going like his place. In other words, Rashi explains that there are two different ways you can enumerate things. You can say esrim v'achad, for example. Or you could say achad v'esrim. It's the same thing. 21. Esrim v'achad or achad v'esrim. So in some contexts, you'll find that in the Tanakh also, sometimes they will mention the smaller number first. Achat v'esrim, shalosh v'arba'im. Sometimes you'll have the larger number before the smaller number. It really depends.
That doesn't go well with the tune of...
No, it does not. I'm just giving an example. So Rabbi Meir is following his way that they did achat v'achat, achat v'shtayim, achat v'shalosh. But in the Rabbi Yehuda's community, it was more customary to count by saying the smaller number first. Okay, so you would say shtayim v'esrim, shalosh v'esrim. So he would say that you switch it around. Instead of saying achat v'shtayim, you say shtayim v'achat, shalosh v'achat. So okay. So now the Gemara says miat haza'a rishona tzricha minyan. But what is the reason, after all, that you have to separate them out? In other words, you say achat v'achat. Just say achat, shtayim, shalosh, and get to 8. Know that the number is 8. Why do you have to do achat v'achat, achat v'shtayim, achat v'shalosh? What's the reason to do that? So the Gemara says 2 opinions. Rabbi Elazar says shelo yit'eh b'hazaot. That we don't want him to make a mistake. In other words, since it's possible that he's going to. So since the Kohen Gadol is counting out and he has to remember what he's up to, we don't want him to get confused and think, oh wait, when I said 3, did I mean including that first upward one, or did I mean only the ones after? I can't remember. So we don't have to get confused. So by saying achat v'achat, he knows that he knows the first achat is only the upward one, and now he's counting the downward ones. He knows what he's up to. That's what Rabbi Elazar says. Shelo yit'eh b'hazaot. Rabbi Yochanan amar kirav lefnei kaporet yazeh. She'entam lamar yazeh. That Rabbi Yochanan says that the pasuk says in front of the kaporet he should throw the blood, meaning that's the downward one. Why does it say the word yazeh again? It already said the word yazeh, to throw the blood, in that pasuk. Why does it have to mention v'lefnei kaporet yazeh? Why does it emphasize it again? Talmud amar yazeh limed al haza'a rishona shetzricha minyan im kol achat v'achad. It teaches you that it's a gezerat hakatuv, according to Rabbi Yochanan. The Torah is telling you that he has to count the first splattering of the blood together with the other ones. In other words, Rabbi Elazar interprets it as a practical thing. It was pragmatic. We didn't want him to make a mistake. Rabbi Yochanan is saying, no. The Torah, by mentioning that he should throw the blood and then saying v'lefnei kaporet yazeh sheva pamim, emphasizing that in front of the kaporet he should throw it 7 times. That means you have to connect the throwing of the blood downwards to the throwing upwards. You have to connect them. And how do you connect them? By counting them together. In other words, that counting is mitzaref. It's connecting. It's combining the process into one. It's from the Torah that you have to do that. My benayu. What's the difference between Rabbi Elazar's reason and Rabbi Yochanan's? That according to Rabbi Elazar, if you failed to count, if the Kohen Gadol didn't count, he forgot to count, but he didn't make a mistake. He did 1 upward and 7 downward. He's good. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, even if he didn't make a mistake,
the count connects them.
Then he's missing something, right? The count is what connects them. So even if he did the right number, but he didn't count them, he would have to do it over again. Apparently, it wouldn't be good enough. Okay, so that's a big difference. Whether the counting is part of the essence of the avodah, it's part of the core of the service, or it's just a practical strategy that he had not to get mixed up. There's a big difference between the two. If he's actually doing something, or he's just keeping tabs on the number for practical reasons. So then it said that Yatza v'nichol kana zahav shebehechal. He would exit the Kodesh HaKodeshim and place the blood on a golden stand. And then he would go and slaughter the sa'ir, slaughter the goat, and bring the goat's blood in for the goat application. And then we saw that there was a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. The Chachamim said there were two stands, one for the blood of the bull and one for the blood of the goat. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, there's only one golden stand. So when he comes out, he puts the blood of the par onto the golden stand. He comes, he brings the blood of the sa'ir, and then when he has to switch back to the par, he has to take the par and put down the sa'ir. In other words, because there's only one stand, there's not two. So Tananatam we learned over there in another Mishnah. This was in Shikalim, which was just not too long ago that we learned it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Lo ayu shofarot dekine chova mipnei ta'aruvot. That Rabbi Yehuda said, we don't have, now we knew that there were things called shofarot, which we call a tzedakah box. Okay? Basically they had boxes that they would place money in for various korbanot. You wanted a korban olah? Put it in this box. So you want a korban this? Put it in this box. So he said that one thing, according to the Chachamim, there was a box called the shofar for kinim. What are kinim? A woman, let's say, who gave birth, or a zava who needs to be purified. She comes, she puts money in, and they buy two birds. One bird is a chatat, one bird is an olah. And they offer it for her. That's called kinim, pairs. Rabbi Yehuda said, we don't do that. We have a thing for burnt offerings, but not for the pairs of offerings. Why not? Because you're mixing in chatat money with olah money. Two different types of korbanot. He didn't like that. We'll see what the problem is. My mipnei ta'aruvot. What does he mean we don't have that box because of the mixture? We'll see how this connects to what we're talking about in a second. Amar Rav Yosef, mipnei ta'aruvet chova bin dava. Because you're going to mix chova and nidava. You're going to mix offerings that are obligatory with offerings that are not obligatory. And Rashi explains what's the problem, what's the real issue. The issue is that if you give a voluntary offering, you can only give it olah. You cannot bring a chatat voluntarily. You have to have done something or experienced something to bring a chatat. So what could happen is you could have money that's for bird offerings that gets mixed up. You think it's for an olah, or you think it's and you bring it as an olah and it was supposed to be a chatat, or you think it is for a chatat, and it was really supposed to be an olah. We're only dealing with birds. Okay. So birds is no shlamim.
That's an obvious. Right? That's an obvious that you can't. It's pretty obvious that you can't mix the chova with the
right.
chatat, yeah.
So the concern is that if you have two boxes, one is for bird offerings that are chova, where one of them has to be a chatat, one has to be an olah. The other one is for bird offerings that are nidava, where they both have to be olot. So the concern is maybe the Kohen's going to take the money out. He's not exactly paying attention. He's going to bring a chatat and an olah instead of two olot, or vice versa. He's going to mess up. So Amar le Abaye says, "V'navid tzirei v'nechtov alayu hay chova v'hay din dava." Why can't you just do what any rational, practical person would do? Write on one box chova, one box nidava. People will see the sign. Rabbi Yehuda let le ketiva. Rabbi Yehuda holds writing is not good enough. He doesn't hold by writing. What does that mean? He doesn't hold by writing. He doesn't know that writing exists. Of course he does. What it means is that he doesn't think we can rely on that to prevent a person from making a mistake. Okay? So, Ditnan, as we learned in our Mishnah, this is how it connects back to our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo hayasham ele kan ehad bilvad. He said there was only one stand for the blood of the bull and the blood of and the blood of the goat. Why? So Terei my ta'amalo. Why doesn't he want there to be two? Mishum de mehalfe. So obviously the concern is you're going to mix one up with the other. He doesn't want there to be. In other words, if you have only one stand, you're always going to know what you're holding in your hand. Okay, but if you have two and you put them both down, which one did I put there? Which one did I put to the left, to the right? So he doesn't want that to happen. So the Gemara says, why can't we put on the stand? One has a nice little plaque that says par. One has a nice plaque that says sa'ir. Why isn't that a good solution? So the answer is, we must conclude that clearly Rabbi Yehuda does not rely upon writing a sign on something as a reasonable siman to prevent someone from making a mistake. Otherwise, he would allow you to do that in the Kodesh too. For the par and the sa'ir to have 2 stands. From the fact that he doesn't like to have 2 stands, and just to label, that means he doesn't rely on labels. Labels don't work. Okay. Metive, we raise an objection. Again, this is the Mishnah from Shekalim. There were 13 shofarot, 13 different boxes in the Mikdash. Vaya katuv alehen, tiklin hadatin. One said, new shekalim from this year. V'tiklin atikin. People who didn't bring their machatzit shekel last year, bring it now. For last year's. There was another box for that, and that went to a different fund. V'kinim, there was one for pairs of birds. V'gozale ola, one is for the other birds that are for a burnt offering. V'itzim, somebody wants to donate wood. Ulvona, frankincense. V'zahav, gold. L'kaporet, for the kaporet, for the aron. And some say it means also for other golden vessels that would be made. But in any case, the point is that all of these were labeled Vishisha Lindava, and 6 were for Nidavot. In other words, just people who wanted to give money, and they would put them in one of these 6 boxes. Tiklin Chadatin Elu Shekalim Shel Kol Shana V'Shana. New Shekalim means this year's. Tiklin Atikin Mishlo Shakal Eshtakad Yishkol Shana Haba. Somebody who didn't bring their machatzit shekel last year brings it now. Kinin hen torin. When it says kinim, it means torin. These are the larger birds that are brought as offerings. And gozale ola hen bnei yonah. Those are the doves, the smaller birds that are brought. Vechulan olot divrei Rabbi Yehuda, and all olot says Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. In other words, there was no box. The Chachamim say that kinim was you put money in the kinim box for a chatat and an olah. You needed to bring in a chatat and olah, you put the sum of money in there, and they take it out for you, and they buy it for you. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Only olot. We don't want any chataot in there. We don't want the money of chatat in there.
Does everybody hold that you can get mixed up? I mean, they have no problem with getting mixed up? Or don't they hold that the condition
We'll see what
goes
happens.
money to the...
We'll see what happens in a second. They're going to have to deal with that problem too, right? But what do you see here? What's the obvious problem with Rabbi Yehuda? We're saying that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold by labels, right? But he just said that there's 13 labeled boxes that they use, right? So his concern seems to be about mixing chatat and olah, not about labels. So maybe it doesn't have relevance to our Mishnah after all. Okay, so the Gemara says, Rav Dimi Amar Amrei b'Ma'arava. So he said that they said in the West, Rav Dimi, when he came from Israel, he said this was the explanation they gave of Rabbi Yehuda, Gezerah mishum chatat shemetu ba'aleha. That the concern is about a chatat whose owner dies. In other words, you place money, or a person places money into the box. Many people have placed money into the box, and we're taking from that money to buy the chatat and the olah. The problem is that your money that was for a chatat, if the person dies, chatat shemetu ba'aleha, a chatat, or money for a chatat, that the owner died, is now completely not able to be used. Completely not able to be used. And if it's mixed in with other money, all of that money is going to be ruined.
Because it belongs to his estate.
In other words, if you're putting all the money together, we can't identify the money of the guy who died now.
But why can't it be used?
Because once a person dies, whatever chatat they gave can't be given. It's a gzerat hakatuv. It's just a chok basically. That a chatat is very personal. It's only for that person. If a person designated a chatat, his inheritors, his heirs cannot bring it. Nobody else can bring it. And olah, yes, because an olah has its own intrinsic kedusha. But the chatat relates to me. It's my purification from my mistake. Once I die, it becomes nothing. I mean, in other words, it becomes worse than nothing because you can't use it. So the Gemara says, Umi chashinan. Do we really worry that somebody put their money in is going to die? Vatnan, we learned in the Mishnah in Gitin, famous Mishnah, that if somebody sends money from across the ocean for a chatat, we don't say, well, maybe by the time the money got there, he died. We don't. We assume he's alive. So to anybody who deposited money in this container that has chatat and olah, we assume he's still alive. So rather, Ela mishum chatat shemetu ba'aleha. Vadai. In other words, the concern is that you're going to have everybody put their money into this one container, and then somebody's going to die. We know they died. Not that we're worried maybe someone's going to die. Somebody dies, and now what's going to happen? All of that money is ne'esat. All of the money becomes prohibited now as chatat. Because it's all mixed. We can't identify which is the chatat money. All of it is mixed. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda didn't want you mixing chatat and olah, because now that because once you do that, you're going to affect everybody.
But what if you only had chatat money and
there could be the same problem. Yeah, because we don't know whose is yours. Right. So that's why it says no boxes for chatat money. You do that individually. We don't want any collection of chatat money because that creates problems. Certainly mingling it with others, but apparently he would hold even if you had a collection, you can't do chatat as a collection. It has to be individual. That's what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. Because somebody dies and then you lose a lot. Why can't you just pick out 4 zuz? In other words, say like this. Okay, Bob died. Okay, he had his money in there. Let's take out whatever the value of the chatat that Bob would have brought was. Throw it in the ocean. Say, this is Bob's money. We don't know what his money really is. Open up a meter, a parking meter. You can't tell which money is yours, right? We don't know which money is his. We'll take the amount of a chatat, we'll throw it in the ocean and say, now the rest is good. So
the
what
seems to have significance, the money itself.
The money itself. So v'hanach nishtiru will permit everything else. Rabbi Yehuda let lebrera. That Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold from berera. Berera is a halachic concept throughout Shas. Retroactive clarification. In other words, the Gemara is suggesting all the money is placed into this box. We don't know what money is what. The Kohen is going to take out money and say, okay, this is for Bob, this is for so-and-so, this is for so-and-so. In other words, why can't we just take out money and say, this money belongs to Bob, we give it to Bob, we designate it as Bob's money, and we throw it away. He says, let lebrera. He says you cannot retroactively change establish the status of something. You can't say, you can't make a condition like this. If somebody dies from this pot of money, I'm going to take out money and say, this is the money that really belonged to them. Retroactively. It has Kedusha. It has Kedusha. You designate it as your chatat.
But you could also have a problem that somebody may have brought counterfeit money and then you might be irritated.
But it's another issue. But here you take out money and you want to retroactively say that this money is the money that belonged to Bob. He says you can't determine things retroactively like that. Whatever is. Bob's money is in there. He died. It ruins everything. So therefore Rabbi Yehuda says no. But what's the point? The point is that Rabbi Yehuda is not coming onto this because of an issue with the writing on the boxes. He believes that writing on boxes works. So that's also not going to be the issue with why he says that you can't have 2 stands and he only allows you to have 1 stand for the blood. It's not because writing doesn't work. Writing works. The issue here is very specific to the case. That there's a problem with mixing monies of various parties with chatat, when chatat is involved. Because if somebody were to die, it ruins it for everyone. And so therefore, he doesn't want chatat money to be intermingled with other people's or with other kinds of korbanot. But as we're going to see, the next piece of Gemara tomorrow, it's a very short Amud Aleph, and then a very, in a regular Amud Bet, the discussion in the Gemara is going to be, what is Rabbi Yehuda's position about berera? About retroactive clarification of things, and how that explains the fact that he rejects the idea of retroactive clarification, explains why he doesn't want chatat money to be mixed together, but it has nothing to do with what we initially thought that it had to do with the right.